Very good. So I hope you enjoyed that. And if you didn't enjoy it, well, then there is always more opportunities in the future to learn this beautiful practice of meditation here. So this morning I am going to talk about some of the basic aspects of Buddhist practice, how to kind of get your practice going, how to integrate all the various parts of the Buddhist path. So your Buddhist practice becomes like a holistic thing, something which becomes a benefit for you, something which enhances your life rather than detracts from your life, which so many other things do, to reduce the suffering and problems in life and increase the joy and happiness and all these other things that everybody in the whole world, including animals and unseen beings, everybody wants these things. So one of the very basic things on the Buddhist path for me is the idea of how to commit oneself to this practice. And one of the things that I always see in the Buddhist world, and this is everywhere pretty much, whether it is we travel around and you see the same things everywhere. People tend to stray to either two sides of the Buddhist practice. Either they become involved in large amounts of rituals, rituals, pujas, chantings, and this is what the Buddhist life sometimes revolves around and what it becomes. Just one endless mass of rituals, and it's a very, very common thing in Buddhist countries. But be careful with that. Understand the limitations of rituals. Rituals, yes, they can have a certain purpose. Sometimes a ritual can make you feel a bit more happy, right? You do a nice Buddha puja and you feel a sense of gladness and contentment with that. But understand that the ritual should have a purpose. There should be something that enhances your practice and kind of lifts you up and moves you in the right direction. So find a good balance. A little bit of ritual is okay, but not too much. Don't make that the end-all and be-all of your Buddhist practice. Because if you do, you're not going to reap the real benefits of what this is all about. This is one side, one extreme that people go to. The other extreme that people go to is they become intellectual Buddhists. Right? This is also something you see everywhere around the world. People like to read endless number of books. They like to discuss the nature of dependent origination, paticca samuppada. What does it really mean? How do we understand all these links, right? And this is a kind of subject you can talk about forever and ever. You just go on talking, and then you die, right? And all you have done your whole life is talk about the nature of dependent origination. It's possible to live like that. Or you get into the Abhidhamma and you discuss Abhidhamma again, and there is no end to those discussions. There's something very satisfying with intellectual discussion and talking about things, trying to resolve and understand the aspects of Buddhism, something very satisfying. But it's precisely because it is satisfying that we have to be careful, because it is a sidetrack. One of those beautiful things the Buddha said in one of his suttas, he said that, remember monks, he takes up a bunch of leaves from the ground and he asks the monks and the nuns and the lay people, whoever is there, he asks them, these leaves that I'm holding in the palm of my hand, are these leaves more, or are all the leaves overhead in all the trees in this park, are they more? What is more, the leaf in my hands or all the leaves in the trees? And of course the monks rightly say, the leaves in your hand are just tiny number. It's all the leaves overhead on the trees that are far, far greater. And this is exactly what I'm talking about now. All the leaves in the head, in the trees overhead, they're all the philosophy, all the speculations, all the things in the world that we can talk about endlessly, for which there is no end. And because there is no end, when we die, we still haven't finished those philosophical discussions. And then we wonder, did I spend my life in the right way? or should I have done something else? So there is a middle path here between the rituals on the one side and the intellectual pursuit on the other side. And it is this middle path which actually is really challenging for people. This is actually the hardest one. The intellectual pursuit, the ritual side, is easy. It is that middle way which is the difficult one. Why is it so hard? And the reason it is so hard is because of we have to commit ourselves, we have to persevere in the practice, and as we do that, we also have to keep on investigating, is this working for us or not? And this, to me, is the most difficult thing in all of Buddhism, to find that commitment, to find that perseverance, to find that investigation which always asks, am I heading in the right direction or not? This is the hard part. So because that is the hard part, that is where we need to put in the work and try to do something in our lives. So what can we do about this? How can we find this commitment? How can we find this perseverance? How can we find this kind of movement forward on the Buddhist path? And this is going to be perhaps my main topic this morning. How can we get this commitment in our life? And the answer is to understand how Buddhism works. What we have to do sometimes is go back to the very beginning. What is the root thing, the foundational thing on the Buddhist path that supports absolutely everything else? Right? If you understand the root thing, the most basic foundation, if you put that into place, then everything else tends to arise as a consequence. It makes sense, right? Foundation is there, then you can build a house. The foundation is there, everything else also happens on the Buddhist path. So what is that foundation? And that foundation can be looked upon in many ways, but I think the root foundation that you very often find in the sutras is the idea of kalyana mitta, good friendship. Right? Good friendship. And who is the most basic, who is the most important of all good friends? It is, of course, the Buddha himself. He is the root, kalyana mitta. He is the one from which all these Buddhist teachings arise. Without the Buddha, there would be no Buddhism in the world. So what we need to do then is to go back to our main kalyana mitta, the Buddha, and ask, what did he teach? What are his teachings? And just by doing that, just by asking that question and applying ourselves in that direction, something marvelous starts to happen. Our mind starts to shift. We start to look on the world in a new way, and we start to grow in the Dhamma simply by doing that. That's all you have to do, is to hang out with the Buddha, be with the Buddha, understand his teachings. Right? Isn't that easy? Is there anyone here who cannot hang out with the Buddha? Just like you can hang out with your friends here today, you can also hang out with the Buddha. Okay, you may say, the Buddha died 2,500 years ago. How can we hang out with the Buddha? It's very easy. You read and understand what he was teaching. And by reading and coming to understand what he was teaching, you are actually hanging out with the Buddha. These are the words of the Buddha. They were meant for people at that time. They're also meant for people today. Remember, the Buddha had this idea of the Dhamma Chakka Pavatana, setting in motion the wheel of the Dhamma. When the Buddha taught his teachings 2,500 years ago, he realized there would be people listening to his words 2,500 years later. He realized there were people listening to his words in all kinds of diverse culture. And this, I think, is one of those astonishing things about the Buddhist teachings, is that they are so easily translatable across time and across cultures. And everybody can understand these teachings because they speak to universal problems that everybody has. We all seek a safety, a way out of suffering and problems, and a movement towards happiness. Everybody wants that. So one of the reasons why it is so important to have the Buddha as a kalyana mitta, and this comes back to one of the most profound of all the Buddhist teachings, and that very profound teaching is the Buddhist teaching of non-self, anatta, right? Anatta teachings. And what that means, the idea of anatta, one thing it means, it has many, many consequences. But one of the important things that the teaching of anatta means is that our lives are largely controlled by conditions and circumstances around us. And one very nice way of looking at this, to understand this, is to regard yourself in a sense like a ship on the ocean. You are a ship on the ocean, but you are a ship without a rudder, without a steering mechanism, without an engine. And that ship, which is on the ocean without steering, without an engine, what happens to it? It is at the mercy of the conditions around it. If the wind comes from the north, the ship goes to the south. If the wind comes from the east, the ship goes to the west. If the current comes from the north, the ship goes to the south. It is 100% at the mercy of the causes and conditions that surround that ship. And this is really the idea, Buddhist idea of anatta, is that we also are the product of the causes and conditions around us. This is what we are. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like I'm in charge, right? I can do things. I can do this, I can do that. But the idea of anatta is that in the end, we are like rudderless ships on the ocean, flowing along according to the prevailing conditions, the currents and the winds. So what we have to do is to make sure that we get into the right current, right? We have to make sure that we get the wind from the right direction. Because when we get the wind from the right direction, if we get the current from the right direction, we will sail in the right direction. The ship will move in the right direction. So you have to place that ship in the right place, and then things will be okay. And that is what we're doing when we are reading the word of the Buddha. We're placing ourselves in the right conditions to enable us to move forward on the Buddhist path. This is the root condition. That means the sailing of the ship happens all by itself, and it moves you towards happiness, towards contentment, towards peace, towards compassion, friendliness, a good heart, and away from all the troubles and all the sufferings in life. So this is why it is so important, the idea of Kalyana Mitta, the idea of the word of the Buddha, why it is so incredibly foundational on the Buddhist path. So this is what I would then recommend you, everyone who is here, try to understand in a deep way what the Buddha was talking about. What are some of the things, what are some of the ways we can do that? And one of the most obvious ways, right, is to read the word of the Buddha for yourself. And there's lots of beautiful things that you can read about in the word of the Buddha. You can take the very favorite of everybody, the Dhammapada, and read a few verses every now and again. And remember that every time you read a verse in the Dhammapada, remember to contemplate it, to think about it. What does it really mean, right? You can take one verse in the Dhammapada, and you can probably, if it is a good verse, contemplate that for the rest of your life. And that can be the nourishment on your Buddhist path. That's really often all you need. There's a nice place in the suttas where the Buddha is asked by a monk. He is asked, what does it mean to be learned in the Dhamma? And the Buddha says, what it means to be learned in the Dhamma is to take one verse, and contemplate it thoroughly and fully. That's all it means to be learned in the Dhamma. That's all you have to do. One gatha, right? One verse. And contemplate that fully. All of the Dhamma, if it is a good verse, all of the Dhamma is contained in those 4 lines of a verse. So you approach the Buddhist teachings in this way. And if you want to go beyond the Dhammapada into some of the other teachings, we have, of course, the 4 Nikayas, right? Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, and Anguttara Nikaya, which contain essentially all of the Buddha's teachings. So you go in there and you start reading, and you see some of these marvelous teachings. And sometimes it really hits home. You think, wow, this is just so applicable. It really applies to my own life. I remember one of the suttas that always really made a big difference in my life was a sutta that is found in the Samyutta Nikaya, in the Kosala Samyutta. Kosala Sangyutta is where the King Pasenadi of Kosala, I'm sure you all know this, you're all very educated in Buddhism here in Sri Lanka, which is wonderful, of course. And King Pasenadi of Kosala is talking to the Buddha, right? And King Pasenadi says to the Buddha, oh, I come from all of those stressful things that kings have to do. I've been sitting in council, talking to all these people, talking about all the problems in the country. You know, people are lying. I'm fed up with all of that. It's just such a terrible thing to have these things all the time. And then the Buddha says to him, well, great king, if a man would come to you from the northern direction, and this man who came from the north, he were to tell you, King, Sire, Sir, Your Majesty, you should know that from the north, as a massive mountain, this enormous mountain, is moving in this direction, crushing all living beings in its path. And then the Buddha says, then another man would come from the east, and the man from the east would say exactly the same thing. From the east, sir, you should know that there is this enormous mountain walking in this direction, crushing all living beings in its path. And then a man from the south would come, from the southern direction too, Your Majesty. There is this enormous mountain coming, crushing all living beings in its path. And the same thing from the west. And then the Buddha says to the King Pasenadi, so, great king, Maharaja is how the Buddha would call the king. So how, great king, would you act in such a situation? And King Pasenadi replies, well, if this massive destruction of life came to be, and everybody is crushed, and all those mountains are moving in my direction, right, eventually the king himself is going to be crushed by those mountains. It's only a matter of time. What would you do, great king, if that were the case? And the king says, if that were the case, what could I do except live a wholesome life, do what is right, and live the spiritual life? And then the Buddha says something like, sadhu, sadhu, great king, but remember that I'm telling you, I'm announcing to you, great king, that old age and death are rolling in upon you right now as we're talking these words. There may not be any great mountains out there, but instead of physical great mountains, there are the great mountains of old age and death, always rolling in upon us. And then the Buddha says to the king, what would you do in a situation like that? And he says, well, in that sort of situation, what can I do except make sure that I do what is good, that I live a good life, and I practice the spiritual life? And the Buddha says, so it is, great king, so it is. I don't know, when I read that sutta the first time, I felt, wow, this is just so true. This is just so obviously the case. We all know that we're going to die one day. This is the only certainty in life. Sometimes they say the only certainty in life is death and taxes, but taxes obviously is far less certain than death, right? Death is the real issue. So it's so certain. We know about these things, but we tend to forget about it. And a simple teaching like that, I remember reading that, I thought, boy, it is so urgent. You've got to get on with things. And this is the power of these teachings, that they are so powerful in directing our mind in the right direction, in getting our priorities right, in pointing our nose towards happiness rather than pointing our nose towards suffering, which is so often the case. So this is one of the beautiful powers of reading the word of the Buddha. Things there which stand out and grab your heart and make you feel, wow, now I understand what life is really about. And of course, one of the problems with this, which I recognize, is that very often when you try to read the suttas on your own, sometimes you feel perhaps a bit overwhelmed, or you feel you don't really understand it fully. So one thing, if that doesn't really work for you, another thing is to listen to discourses, right? There are lots of people in the world now, monastics, sometimes lay people, who are able to explain these discourses in a very powerful and beautiful way. So sometimes you can just listen to these discourses. They are, if there is no suitable temple in your vicinity or suitable monastics in your vicinity, there is lots available on the internet these days that you can use as well, which can enhance you to help you understand these things. So use those resources. Remember, one of the most important things in Buddhist practice, as I was saying, is to enable you to commit yourself and persevere. And sometimes you feel a bit, you had a bad day, you feel a bit down, you don't really feel like this, you can't really practice the Buddhist teachings properly anymore. Everything is a bit kind of grim and negative, right? That is the time when you feel that you are losing your sense of direction, losing your sense of priorities. That is the time to get out a nice Dhamma talk, a talk which lifts you up and you feel good again. You feel that now gets you back on track, right? It reminds you of what is important in life and what you should be doing. And this is so important, that we inspire ourselves in this way, that we listen to a good Dhamma talk, that we read a nice sutta when we feel that we are losing our direction, losing our sense of priorities. It is so important that we have that as a backup. And the reason is because our ordinary life tends to take us in the wrong direction. We tend to be overcome by craving and desires. We tend to be overcome by all these worldly things. And the only way to keep you on the right track is to go back to the Dhamma again and again and again. And gradually, it starts to sink into our heart and the direction becomes obvious. So remember this, inspire yourself, lift yourself up on a regular basis so that the direction is there, the direction is obvious. This is what Kalyanamitta is all about. This is the power of Kalyanamitta to push you forward and drive you forward on this wonderful path. And then the results become very powerful as a consequence. So this is the first thing that we can do in our life as Buddhists, and this is, I think, very important to find the Kalyanamitta in the suttas and in Dhamma talks. Another thing which is very important, I think, and has been very important in my own life, is sometimes to meet with people who embody the qualities of the Buddhist path. Sometimes you meet monastics, sometimes you meet even lay people, and when you get into their presence, you feel relaxed, you feel at ease, you feel even joyful and happy. You feel, wow, this person is just so special, right? You feel something very special is there, and it's almost as if all those qualities, all those things that you can read about in the suttas, they are embodied in this person, and you think, whoa, this is remarkable, this is amazing, isn't this wonderful? Here I can see the results of the path directly in front of me. It's no longer theory, it becomes a reality here. So this is one of the things I would recommend you as well, to find people in your life, people who have practiced the path before you, people who have those results already in the heart. And when you meet people like that, when you see people like that, again, you feel lifted up. You start to believe in the possibilities of this path, to believe in the transforming potential of this practice. It is not enough often just to read about these things. Very often we have to see these things in reality, and then they start to become very powerful in our own life. And this is what I have found. My teacher, who is very famous, very, very famous these days, both here in Sri Lanka and everywhere he travels, he's kind of mobbed by people. And that is Ajahn Brahmali. And he was one of those people who got me started on the Buddhist path, because I felt I could see the qualities of the Dhamma in this person. I thought, wow, I want to be this person's disciple because he has qualities that I want to develop in myself. And this becomes very, very strong and very, very useful. And there's another case, not a few months ago, I went to Thailand, and because Ajahn Brahmali was originally ordained in Thailand, we have some connections in Thailand with some of the monks there. Most of the monks are just ordinary monks like everywhere, right? But occasionally you find one monk who sort of stands out from the crowd, who is very, very special. And I went to visit one of these monks. I knew him a little bit before, And you come into the presence of this monk again, and you feel the sense of there's something palpable about it. You can almost feel that there's something there. You feel the sense of kindness, the sense of metta, the sense of compassion, the sense of ease, right? The sense of non-judgment. You feel you can just be yourself, right? You can just really relax in the presence of a person like that. And it's very beautiful when that happens. And you could see the people, all the people were there around this monk. He just sitting there. He doesn't say very much, right? He's one of these very quiet monks. This is what happens when you have a very developed mind. You don't want to say very much. People were just sitting in his presence, and everybody was very happy just sitting there, right? It's one of those amazing things. He doesn't have to say anything. People are still happy. And then he is also quite eccentric, this monk. He has this kind of little things that he does. So he has this big bowl of sweets sitting next to him, big bowl of sweets. And there's this crowd of people sitting in front of him. And then he takes, every now and again, he takes the bowl of sweets, lifts it up and chucks out all the sweets onto the crowd. So it's like raining sweets. And people are so happy. They get, these sweets, they are imbued with metta, and they're also nice to eat at the same time. So double benefit from these sweets. So this is how he practices. And because he does these kind of things, people feel so relaxed around him, because he's such an easygoing and such a beautiful being to be around. And it reminds me also of another story. And this is a story that my teacher, Ajahn Brahmali, tells. He was ordained in Thailand over 40 years ago now, so he's become quite a very senior monk these days. And he tells a story that after his 5th Vassa as a monk, monastics, they're supposed to stay with a teacher for 5 rains, but after the 5th Vassa, they can kind of go out on their own and they can start to explore the Buddhist world in a larger way. And that's what he did. After his 5th year as a monk, he started wandering out into the northeast of Thailand and trying to visit all of these famous monks that exist in the northeast of Thailand. Just like here in Sri Lanka, if you go into the forest deep in the jungle, you'd be surprised. Some of the monks you find there are very astonishing and very developed in their practice, just like in Thailand. So one of these famous monks that he went to see is a monk called Ajahn Tate. He is dead now. But at that time, which would have been in the late 1970s, he was very, very famous. And the king of Thailand had built this enormous hall for him. He had this enormous hall called the Mandapa, which was built by the king of Thailand himself. Beautiful hall, right? You have seen kind of some of the Thai architecture, very ornate, very nice colors of gold and all these kind of things. Very, very beautiful hall. And a very large, right? So Ajahn Brahmali is approaching this hall. He knows that this famous meditation master is sitting inside the hall, receiving people. So he approaches this hall. He has all these questions in his mind. Oh, I'm going to ask him about this, ask him about that. This is my opportunity to ask a real meditation master. So he goes into the hall with all these questions. And he comes into the hall and he looks around. There's nobody there. It's empty. Where is Ajahn Tate? And then he looks a second time. And when he looks for a second time, he sees this old man, right, sitting in the corner, far, far away. And he couldn't even see him the first time. And of course, he realized later on the reason why he couldn't see him is that when somebody is so well developed in their mind, when they have left behind almost all aspects of the sense of self, right? That's what happens when you become an Aryan, when you become a Sovan, and later on an Arahant. You're leaving behind all this burdensome feeling of a sense of self inside of us. And because he left all of that behind him, he doesn't stand out anymore. We stand out in the crowd very often because our sense of self, we say, look at me, I am here, right? We want to be somebody here. But when you don't want to be anyone anymore, it's like you fade away in this world. You are no longer visible. You can't see them anymore. And then Ajahn Brahmali said, when he realized this, he felt so at ease and so relaxed. Here is this person who All they have is kindness. There is no judgment. There's only wisdom. There's no anger. None of that negative stuff is found. And as soon as he felt completely at ease in the presence of this monk, he said, all the questions he had, they vanished. They disappear. Because when you are relaxed, I don't know if you had a little bit of benefit from the meditation before, but you probably found that when you start to really relax, the mind becomes peaceful, the thinking disappears, and everything just becomes very beautiful. And this is what happened to Ajahn Brahm in this situation. So he came in there, he saw this monk, and suddenly all the questions were gone. So he thought, feeling a bit stupid now, I don't know what to do. There's no questions anymore. So he kind of just goes in and he goes up to this monk and he bows down to this monk and he sits down there, doesn't know what to say, but it's such a beautiful presence. You don't actually need to say anything. You just sit there for a while in the presence of the monk, feeling really nice, just being inspired by somebody's presence. Then later on you can walk on and move out. Of course, the monk would have said a few words of encouragement, but very, very simple things, nothing too drastic. So this is what happens when we come into the presence of people who are very developed on the Buddhist path. And this is what happened to me when I went to Thailand recently. So I spent some time with this monk, and then I asked him some very simple questions. And one of the questions I asked him, this was probably the most important one, I asked him, I could see that he was very kind and very gentle, had a lot of metta. So I asked him, what is the best way? How would you recommend to develop the metta practice, the Maitri practice? And then I thought he was going to say, oh, you sit down and you spread out metta to the whole world. May all beings be happy. May all beings be at ease. But did he say that? No. And this is the thing, that when these masters, they always surprise you with the answer, right? They say things you don't expect. So what did he say? He said, the way to practice metta is every day when you wake up, the first thing you should ask you after you wake up is, what can I do today to be of service? What can I do today to do something good for the world, for the people around me, for those people who I meet today, those people who cross my path, if you like. If you do that every day, then you are practicing metta. And I thought, okay. I was surprised. I didn't expect that. But when you think about it, it is very obvious. The idea is that very often we try to go too fast, too quickly on the path. We forget to put in all the foundation work. But if we put in all the foundation work in the right way, if we do all the right things, then the metta tends to arise from that. And the basic practice of metta in our lives is not what we do when we meditate. The basic practice of metta is how we live our life every day, how we treat the people around us. That is the basic practice of metta. So remember that, and it's possible to make this kind of practice very, very beautiful and very powerful. The way I try to live, I want to emphasize try, because I certainly don't always succeed, but the way I try to live, I try to think, my every action, my every speech, my every thought, I want it to be a gift to the people around me. Whenever I do something, I have a choice. It can be for the detriment of the people around me, or it can be for their benefit. If it is going to be for the detriment, I don't do that act. If it is going to be for the benefit of people around me, then I do it. Everything I do, I want to give it to be a gift to everyone around me whenever I do something. When I speak, how can my speech be a gift to the people around me? How can I help lift up the spirit of people around me? Right, we have such tremendous power with our speech. We can say negative things and it drags other people down. You know what it feels like when other people say something hurtful to you? It can often feel bad. Either you become hard inside and you say, no, that's not right. Or you become negative in even worse ways. It always has a negative impact. We have so much impact on each other. And what that means is that not only do we have impact in the negative way, but we have a tremendous power inside of ourselves to lift other people up, to help them, right? Just by saying something nice at the right time, saying something uplifting, we're actually supporting the whole world around us. You're giving a gift to the whole world. And what a wonderful thing that is. And then you take it even further. You take it to the level of the mind itself. How can everything I think be a gift to the people around me? How can every thought I have be something that other people would feel good about if they knew about that thought? Perhaps you think that how can a thought be a gift? But please don't think like that, because how we think, the nature of our mind comes out from us, right? People can feel the vibe, as they say. This is kind of a hippie word from the 1960s, but people can feel the vibe. It's like they know whether you are in a good mood or a bad mood. And if you think kind thoughts, it does have an effect on other people. And this becomes such a powerful practice. If every act you do, every word you say, every thought you think is a gift to the people around you, what is happening is that you are developing your mind so fast. You are changing your own life so quickly. And not only your own life, but also the life of people around you. It's a win-win situation. You are progressing on the path, and so are all the people you come into contact with. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that such a beautiful thing when that happens? It is such an uplifting thing, right? If we all did that, wow, the world would be such a wonderful and powerful place if we all practiced in this way. So remember that. Remember, try to make everything you do a gift to yourself and a gift also to the people around you. And wow, your life starts to transform. And then, when your life transforms, then if you do this over a long period of time, right, you do this for weeks, for months, perhaps for years, then as your life starts to transform, then when you sit down to do your meditation practice, it is so easy. I don't know how your meditation is. Sometimes perhaps your meditation is a bit scattered. You're thinking about this and that. Sometimes you fall asleep, right? Fall asleep, which is fine. You're very welcome to fall asleep in meditation, because falling asleep, at the very least, you are relaxing, right? You're not stiff and tense and all of these kind of things. That's great. Please fall asleep. But the point is, it's even better if you are clear, right? That's even better than sleeping. Sleeping is nice, but feeling good and having clear mindfulness, even better than sleeping. So this is what happens. If you build up all of those good qualities inside of you, if you build that up and then you sit down to meditate, the meditation starts to work. It really starts to bite. It actually happens. Why? Because the present moment becomes the pleasant moment, as my teacher likes to say here. The present moment is the pleasant moment. If you have done a lot of good actions in your life, you feel naturally good about yourself. And when you feel naturally good about yourself, when you sit down and you close your eyes, you feel a sense of gladness inside. And that gladness is the glue that forces you, not forces, that's the wrong word, that enables you to stay in the present moment. In fact, you don't want to go anywhere else. If you feel glad in the present moment, if you feel all these good qualities inside of you, why would you want to think about the future? Why would you want to think about the past? The present moment itself is so beautiful and so nice. And this is really how meditation works. Meditation is this beautiful path of eliminating all your bad qualities, moving towards good qualities, feeling the gladness and the happiness inside. And when you feel that, meditation becomes possible. So why isn't it happening here? And the reason it isn't happening is because, again, the commitment, the perseverance in the practice is often difficult. It is hard to commit ourselves to these things 100%, right? It is hard to actually do these things all the time. You may say, how can my every act be a gift to other people? It's impossible. You're asking too much. You can't ask that from me. But remember, if you are committed, if you persevere, you can gradually change yourself, and you can move in that direction. And gradually you become a being who you never thought you would be able to become. Because of that gradual movement, you're changing the very character of who you are as a person. And qualities you may have thought would never be possible to have, they start to arise in you nevertheless. This is the power of this gradual movement, gradual training. All you have to do is to persevere, to keep on, never give up, right? Go back to the suttas, go back to reading the word of the Buddha, listening to Dhamma discourses, meeting people who you see have practiced the path, who embody the beautiful qualities of Buddhism. And as you do that, the whole thing builds up and builds up and builds up. There's a beautiful simile in the suttas which talks about this. It says that a simile is like the rain, when the rain falls on the mountaintop, right? Just a little bit of rain. But as it rains and rains and rains, that rain starts to accumulate. And as it accumulates, it starts to go into little streams, right? Streams and clefts and gullies, and it starts to flow down the mountain. Then when those little streams flow down the mountain, they fill up the small little lakes. When the small little lakes fill up, they flow into the big rivers. When the big rivers go up, eventually those big rivers, they reach the ocean. Reaching the ocean is like reaching the highest, the pinnacle of the Buddhist path, reaching Nibbana itself. And the raindrops on the top of the mountain is like listening to the word of the Buddha. Right? So what this is saying, what this simile is saying, this is from the Buddha himself. What the simile is saying, if you listen enough to the word of the Buddha, if you keep that rain, keep it falling, keep falling, eventually that's all you have to do to finally reach Nibbana, reach all the happiness that you ever wanted in your life. It's easy, right? Isn't that very easy? It's so easy. You just have to listen to a teaching, take up the book, read the suttas. That's all you have to do. People think, I have to do so much hard work to be a good Buddhist, I have to keep all these precepts and do all the hard work. No, all you have to do is read the word of the Buddha, and everything else comes as a consequence from that. You want to be kind. You don't have to think of sila as a burden anymore. You want to be kind because you understand how it fits into the big picture. You want to be generous because you know generosity has a power of changing the nature of your heart and go in the right direction. You want to meditate because you know that meditation has the power and the potential to transform your mind and change your life into a better person. And it all comes from reading and understanding the word of the Buddha. It all comes from there, and it happens so easily and so nicely. So remember that. Buddhist path shouldn't be a struggle. Buddhist path shouldn't be too difficult. It should be something that happens with a fair amount of ease, a sense of happiness, a sense of enjoying yourself along the way. Of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit. There's always going to be little problems, little difficulties. There is no such thing as the life of a human being without any problems and difficulties. But the general trend should be that. The general trend should be one of moving towards ease, moving towards happiness, moving towards contentment, moving towards finding real fulfillment, finding the answer to the meaning of life itself. Isn't that great, finding the answer to the meaning of life? People don't realize that this is actually what we're doing here. So, what happens once you have that mindfulness? I was talking about a minute ago, the mindfulness is established because you have all the good qualities inside of you. Once the mindfulness is there, meditation is so easy. Right? You are in the present moment. The anapanasati, the watching the breath, is so natural when the mindfulness has already arisen. All you have to do is sit there and wait for the breath to arrive in your mind. And then when your breath arrives, when the breath kind of comes up, is part of what you're seeing, you place your attention very gently on that breath. And it is so relaxing. It is so enjoyable and so easy. And as you do that meditation practice on the breath, you go deeper and deeper into stillness, into samatha, into calm, into vipassana. Vipassana is also part of this. It becomes deeper and deeper and deeper until you reach a state of samadhi. right? State of samadhi is the state of absolute stillness, absolute bliss, absolute ease, absolute contentment. And for the first time in your life, when you reach the state of samadhi, you feel complete, you feel fulfilled, you feel satisfied. There's nothing else that you want. And you think to yourself, wow, this is just astonishing. There's nothing more you want. If there's nothing more you want, it means that you have found the purpose of life itself, the meaning of life itself. This is a very powerful thing, because if you think about it, most of our lives we run around trying to organize things, trying to get things just right. We are driven by craving and by desires to get our life together. That is what life is all about for many people. Driven by craving, driven by all of these things. And then one day you start to question whether following all these desires, following all these cravings really is the way to go. How necessary is it to build up a career? How much money is required? How many pleasures do I actually need? And you start to question the very idea of craving. Is it ever going to get me anywhere? I always think about my own life, and I think when I was young, when you're young, you're so unrealistic, right? In your late teens or early 20s, you have these dreams about the world. I'm going to get this kind of education. I'm going to get this kind of job. I'm going to get this kind of girlfriend and get married or whatever. You have these ideas in your head about where you're heading, right? I'm going to change the world, because when you're young, you're a bit conceited about things, right? Sure, you're going to change the world. You're not going to change the world is going to change you. And unless you step back a little bit and look clearly, you're going to be dragged down into the rat race with everyone else. So then one day you realize that all of these dreams, they are not really true. It's a craving about the future that never comes, that never actually arises. That future that you're thinking about never really materializes. It doesn't exist. And then as you move along the path, you think that you have a very clear aim and goal and purpose in life. And then you start to see that aim, that goal, even as you start to achieve some of those aims, it doesn't give that satisfaction. It doesn't give the contentment. It doesn't give the sense of meaning that you thought it would give. In your dreams, it looked like these aims, this purpose in life is going to give me some sense of achievement, some sense of completion, some sense of satisfaction. And as you move towards it, you realize it doesn't do that. It doesn't actually give you those things. And then, as you do that, you start to question life. You start to ask yourself whether there is another way to that satisfaction and completion. And then one day, you find yourself practicing the Buddha's teachings in the right way. You sit down, get into meditation based on all the qualities that you have accumulated over a very long period of time. And then you go into a state of samadhi and you think, wow, this is it. This is what all that craving was promising me all along. All the craving was saying, if you do this, if you follow me, if you follow after what I say, you will find true satisfaction and contentment in the life. But it never delivers. And then you move in a completely different direction. You let go of the craving, and suddenly you find exactly that thing that craving was promising you in the first place, but in a completely different direction. Whoa, this is it. I have discovered the answer to the meaning of life. Right? That's what it feels like. There's nothing more you want. Complete satisfaction, happiness in the present moment. So this is the idea. This is the purpose of things. This is what we're heading towards discovering the meaning of life itself. And of course, the path doesn't even stop there. It goes even beyond the meaning of life, if you like. That's a bit of an exaggeration. You can't go beyond the meaning of life, but when you get to that meaning of life, you realize that itself has certain drawbacks, because it doesn't last, it is impermanent in its own right. So based on that, you then also find the profound insights on the Buddhist path. And then you move towards the very end of the path itself. But that is way down the line. Before that, there is so much beauty and meaning and purpose and everything to be had in meditation itself. So there you are. This is the Buddhist practice. All of that is available for you, right? The finding, the discovery of the meaning of life is available to you. Isn't that a wonderful thing? All you have to do is to commit yourself. All you have to do is to persevere. All you have to do is to keep on investigating. Am I doing the right thing? Am I heading in the right direction? And all that comes from understanding the Buddha's teachings properly, inspiring yourself by meeting the right people, reading the right things, listening to the right talks, and gradually, you're moving towards the meaning of life itself. And one day, if you do it in the right way, if you persevere, everyone has the potential of getting to that point. Okay, so that is probably enough for this morning. So hopefully you got some good hints out of that, tips out of that. But Venerable Metta Viharish, I will now go on to... Yes, so now I think there will be some tea and everything available for everybody. And while you drink the tea, you can contemplate the Dhamma at the same time. And I'll see you back here later on. Very good.